Again, I'm thrilled to have you all here. So let me officially begin. To all of our viewers, I'm Nancy Board, co-founder and COO of Global Women for Wellbeing, and I'm delighted to have all of you here today for the second part of our two-part series. This one is called Women Leadership and Global Peacebuilding. And we have a remarkable panel here today to discuss this concept and anything else that comes up. But we already know there's a multicultural, multilingual, amazing group of women here in front of my Zoom screen today. So I'm so happy to have you here. I'd like to begin first by introducing Dr. Eleanor Nwadinobi, who prefers to go by Eleanor. So, but just in recognition of your wonderful life achievements, I can't say everything about you. I just want to tell all of our viewers, Google everybody's name, because every woman here, their bios are this long and multi-pages. But Eleanor is a medical doctor by profession and also an international expert in health, women's peace and security, gender, and human rights. She is currently the international president of the Medical Women's International Association and the founding co-chair of Every Woman Treaty, which is how I met Eleanor. Every Woman Treaty is a global treaty to end violence against women and girls, and this is an area that's quite passionate to Eleanor. She was the past Sub-Saharan Regional Chair of the UN Executive Committee, involved in the UN Security Council, which had a strong response in Nigeria. And I know recently the president of Nigeria, President Buhari, has described Nigerian women as peace builders and sustainable leaders around peace and security. So I know you have tons of information to offer us today, Eleanor, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Mariko Gakiya. She is now currently near Kyoto in Japan, so it's late there, and I appreciate you being here with us today. Mariko is on the GW4W Advisory Board, and she is, I don't even know where to begin with you either, Mariko. You're a researcher, you're an academic, you currently are the founding faculty director of the Global Leadership Program for the Graduate School of Medicine at the University of Tokyo. So right now, Mariko is in Japan, and she spends her time between Japan and the US at Harvard, and also did your studies.
But I have currently a different role, but it's part of my past experience.
Okay, well, you just continue to move and change and grow. From Harvard and Oxford and University of Tokyo. And so, yeah, there's so much more to say about your focus, your research focus around peace building, women in leadership, inclusive governance practices. So welcome, Mariko. And now to Karolina Olofsson, Dr. Karolina Olofsson, who's coming to us from Oslo today. And I should have mentioned that Eleanor's in London today.
That's right.
So Dr. Karolina, I'll refer to you as Karolina, my friend, has, again, international experience, her PhD in humanitarianism and conflict response, 2 master's degree in post-war reconstruction and conflict management. You were schooled in Italy and the UK. I know for a fact that you speak at least 7 languages, and that you are Swedish and Peruvian, a world traveler. You spent some time in Niger, which is when I first spoke to you several years ago, a wealth of knowledge in this area. And we're delighted to have you join us today, Karolina. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And our 4th panelist is Dr. Anna Vishart. You might have heard already that Anna is also multicultural. She is Danish and Ecuadorian and also American. She has a dentistry practice, a long time female majority, if not female, totally led dentistry practice in the Boston, Massachusetts area. An incredible background. There's more there than we even realized. And I'd like for you later maybe to speak about what you just shared about what your husband has done in terms of his work around peace initiatives globally. So we have a wonderful panel today. Welcome all of you. The way in which I think the conversation will go today will be free-flowing, even though I have a bit of a format and an agenda, and I've broken it out into several areas that I just want to share with our audience. In order to talk about women in peace building, I don't think we can escape the subject of violence and conflict and also crises. So we're going to touch on those areas. We will then move into how we see peace building for us as leaders, and then move to the future and what's happening now in the world. And then we'll close it out with some final thoughts. But to begin the discussion, Eleanor, I'd like to start with you, please. I'd like to just have you speak to us a little bit more about your experience in working around initiatives with peace and security, gender issues. This is a big subject, I realize, but just looking at it and wanting to know a little bit more about your experience in working with men and women around security and peace building initiatives.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Before I go into work, let me talk about, my background.
Please.
And really serendipitous that I, walked into the area of peace building in the sense that as a child, I experienced the Biafra War. This was a conflict in Nigeria. It was an internal conflict, but it was one of those in which starvation tactics were utilized. So, coming from a background of, my father being, the first Nigerian veterinary graduate of the University of London, my mother a nurse, and my father, holding a very high position in Nigeria. And as a child, to find that we lost everything as we had to run from one part of the country in the north to the south where my father is from. And, to hear guns and mortar. And my mother, in her wisdom as a nurse, used to take my little sister and I to work and keep us, in an underground bunker. Until this day, when I smell, fresh earth, it reminds me of those days running away from the bombs. We were amongst the fortunate few who got to leave the country because my mom, a foreigner, we were taken out by a Red Cross plane that landed on a makeshift airstrip. It had brought supplies and we were flown out. So I have been a refugee. I have, worn other people's clothes, thankfully. I have been received as we were, by my mum's sister in London who welcomed us, and we started life all over again. And with my mother, sending packages to my dad who was left behind in Nigeria, not knowing whether he was even alive or dead. So I didn't realize that in my adult life, I would sort of go through a journey where I thought I would, stick to being a physician, a clinician. And, next minute I found myself, dealing first with cultural practices, violence against widows who had suffered cultural harm, and then HIV and AIDS widows. And when I now started work in peace building, dealing with the Boko Haram conflict, where I was faced with a very new and emerging phenomenon of child widows, because the war was raging in an area where you have child marriage. So we had children who became widows, children who were forcefully married by Boko Haram captors, widowed again, and they as children themselves bearing widows. So that's the sort of, personal experience that I have had, in my life, and seeing it in the lives of others. And therefore, when you talk about people being either displaced or hungry or starving or losing their lives or their livelihoods, it's a personal experience, Nancy.
Mm-hmm. There's no way it can't be. And you've given your life to continue this work, which is, again, incredible that this is now part of what you stand for throughout your career, because it's changed you deeply. And it's been a passion and a mission and a purpose, I hear, as well for you. Yeah. Karolina, could I ask you to speak just a little bit about your background? Similar in some ways to what Eleanor shared, at least some experience, if you'd like to just tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure, of course. So I've been working for the last 15 years or so in international development, primarily humanitarian situations, so countries in conflict or in transition. And although I work particularly in the area of governance and sort of more the state building component of it, to be in a zone of conflict, and I've dealt with the Boko Haram as well, you know, being on the southern tip of Niger, coming up with Chad, Nigeria, Cameroon, and everything that comes with it in the Lake Chad area. And the girls, it's impossible to be shielded, and it shouldn't be shielded from sort of what is going on at the situation. It becomes a very human experience regardless of where you're going in there. And part of my journey, I guess, I haven't had the privilege of going from so many different countries, is seeing that human suffering, regardless of where it's coming, it's very human at its core. And to be able to connect with that, to touch it instead of shy away from it, to be able to connect with other people and sort of embrace the sense of what it means to be human, the sense of how we act as humans, become different in rolling phase. And that has definitely shaped me. And, you know, being part, although you might have an idealistic idea and perception when you start working, and my journey was more out of vocation and idealism perhaps, and then reality comes in and all different nuances to it, and beyond all of those, when people run away from war or suffer from war and then recover from it and go into it, the kind of societies that we build upon that, and how much people are left behind just because we started dehumanizing the experiences, and we dehumanize what they're going through and our responsibility and roles within that. So for me, it's been more kind of sensing the collective aspect of how we work together and how we become part of both the problem and the solution, and sort of making a conscious decision of where we want to be part of that.
Thank you. Thank you. I want, Eleanor, before we leave this subject and move into another area, just to ask you, in your experience, about what would be some of the solutions, a best or a better solution to, is it possible for us to end violence against women and girls? Is that even possible? And if it is, what are some of the solutions that you would recommend?
Yes. Indeed, violence against women and girls, first of all, is preventable. Mm-hmm. It is something that no woman or girl should undergo in their life. Mm-hmm. And unless and until we have a global treaty to end every form of violence against women and girls that uses the interventions that work, unless we use these interventions that are known to work, and these interventions are quite clearly legal reform. We need to train the first responders, you know, people like Karolina who are there, you know, in the front lines, who has spoken of, you know, being in Niger. Indeed, you know, I was there, you know, as I led a team in Niger, you know, northern Nigeria, Cameroon, and, you know, Chad, looking at the Lake Chad area as well. And, you know, drafting the stabilization strategy for Boko Haram. And we said, who are the first line responders? They're the doctors, the nurses, the lawyers that women who are survivors of violence can go to. We also need to be sure that there are appropriate services. They could be shelters, they could be, you know, just safe spaces where those who have suffered violence could go to. The fourth and very, very important is prevention education. When, for example, the world stood still for the Chibok girls, it was the sheer number of girls that were abducted in one, you know, night alone. And sadly, just 3 nights ago in Nigeria, again, in what is usually a safe space, which is the education space, we had over 300 boys abducted from their school, you know? So here you have the sorts of violence you see in conflict. But for all of these interventions that work, unless we have dedicated and ring-fenced funding. And that is why, using the example of the landmines treaty, the tobacco treaty, time has come, time is now for us to have a global treaty to end every form of violence against women and girls, which is preventable.
If I could just add to that, I completely agree with Eleanor and all of the points that she raised. And I mean, the legal framework does create sort of the parameter to start distributing resources and prioritizing what interventions should go. But primarily, I think there is a need for kind of a top-down with the legal structure and then a bottom-up approach as well to change, because often it's a change of mindset, it's a change of perception, how one is interacted. And with Boko Haram and sort of taking away girls, children really from their families and from school, is because they are seen for the functionality. Girls are seen for the function of carrying children and supporting Boko Haram soldiers, for taking care of the camp or whatever it is not being seen as a human being. It's not a she, or it's not a person. It's the function that that little girl is supposed to carry forward. And when you look at the trickle, it would be easy to sort of put it in black and white. The victims only look in this particular way and not the other. But gender-based violence unfortunately exists across the chain. You know, you do see it amongst people, citizens, normal citizens that are going about their lives that are ripped apart for whatever conflict or group that is mobilized. But even within the first responders, whether it's, you know, doctors and nurses, or whether it's humanitarian workers that come in, women there also experiencing violence, or whether it's even in the ministries going into policy level, or whether it's even going to higher kind of political dialogue. It is, and that is heartbreaking, really. I have not met one single sector of the whole change of response in which I have not seen women experience violence and being actually pressed and pushed into lines where perhaps they go back to the point of humanity. The mindset is, when women are being targeted in a particular perspective, it's not being seen as a human being. It's just as a challenge, an obstacle that needs to be removed or taken away, or just something that doesn't want to be dealt with or putting in a particular location. And it's just that sense of humanity. What does that say about us as a species if we cannot see the humanity in others? How much do we see of our own humanity in that case?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Mariko, I just want to see if you had anything you wanted to add to this particular conversation.
I must say that, as you know, being academic and then at the same time, involved in international development for decades. But my involvement is not as a first responder, but rather more diplomatic side. But I really echo that, because of the effort done by Eleanor and Karolina, that we have collected a tremendously critical data the last few decades. So everybody knows in this area that if the woman enters or sit on the table for negotiation for peace treaty,
sure.
We know that Karolina, everyone, the tendency of the peace treaty agreement will likely to last 30% of all the agreement will endure about, 15 years longer than the agreement, only made by the men. So what does it mean? The ripple effect. The person like, Eleanor, Karolina, they understand what involves in the whole chain of violence to the settlement, to the ceasefires. So they know their vision is a long term. That is very critical for female. Okay, so I can really talk later about how, psychological development of boys and then the women are different in terms of the human rights and then the moral development, because that will lead to the international law, the basis of it. So I just wanted to make sure that I echo that it's so important that we really put the women leaders or activists on the table of negotiation. Make sure that the peace treaty will sustain, and then it's so critically that the content of the peace is more humane and then really focus on the social protection, because women are really understanding of what it takes to build the life and the schools and health system once that everything is completely toned down. So it's very essential for all of us to really understand the criticality of for us to take initiative to really try to understand what is really happening on the ground. It's not the far beyond where it is happening in Africa. No, think about that. Only 75 years ago, Japan became free after World War II. We are still suffering. Physical violence may not be there because we had such a successful economic development, but look at that. What did you see in newspaper last week? More women are committing suicide. They decided to end their life. We have more death than coronavirus. This is outcrying of women psychologically, mentally suffering. So the violence is not only offering in a war zone, it's happening in the industrial nation. The people are so isolated. That's people withdrawn in Japan. And men who are in the age of 20 to 40 years old, which is the most productive economic age, they have withdrawn, and then the number, it's like 250,000 or something like that. It's just so, unacceptable. And we are still talking about this economic model. And then when can we really wake up to say, this capitalist model of really focus on the monetarization, we really need to have that more humanistic side of development. So the peace is not only the war zone, but really think about that. 20th century, how we have reconstructed our entire world, the system of economic and social political system was to really share, the power. The power was the engine. So we created a lot of international organization. It worked. The real mission, core mission, was really for peace project. It was a really peace project. Think about the EU, IMF, and then all the United Nations, UNESCO, was the peace. We forgot that. How fragile it is for us to really, think about the peace building. And then now, 21st century, I think that our whole responsibility is not a power sharing, it's a responsibility sharing. That's why we have in the UN, Global Compact, that it's to really focus on the business side, the leadership really coming into play in the public sector and really taking business for the peace.
Yeah.
So in a very good initiative, it's really emerging. We just have to make sure we include that, and then to really, bring the private sector. Every single person, like women forget always about, taking care of ourselves. We always complain too busy. We always do it for others. For boys, they learn morality and then justice is for their own judgment and fairness. For women, the girls, there is a whole, research done in the last, 4 decades. It said that this is really relevant for entire advanced nation. The girls, for morality, is to respond to taking responsibilities and then the compassion to help others. So they are willing to sacrifice for the relationship. So, here we go. There are lots to talk, but I think Anna can really speak a lot about, how we can really build that, in our own domain of professional life. But
well, No, Mariko, that's a perfect segue, because one of my questions is what are these qualities that women have? What qualities do women possess as leaders that are going to help us in managing conflict and crises in general? And Anna, I can certainly begin with you on that. And I'd like to ask each of you a little bit, if you can just throw out, what are those qualities? What makes this work for us as women, as leaders?
I think that it's important to see to listen to what Mariko said, that when a woman is involved in, let's say, a peace treaty or any type of negotiation, it tends to last longer. And I think that genetically, we as women are built in a way that for centuries, or since humanity started, we always assume several roles at the same time. Mm-hmm. We're multitaskers by excellence. We have learned to be mothers, daughters, spouses, friends, caregivers, professionals, and we do this all at the same time. When I was studying my career, I was a mother, I was a spouse, I had to work at the same time, and we learned how to do these things very well. And when we make decisions, I think what's important as women leaders is that when we make decisions, we're able to shift from the right to the left side of the brain almost immediately. And sometimes we're able to use both at the same time. So we make decisions that are rational, but at the same time that have that emotional component that is so important, that when we make a decision, we're making the decision thinking about others. And maybe it's that mother nature that we have in ourselves. And that's why when we come to a resolution, it tends to last longer, because we're thinking of the greater good.
Well said. Did you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just jump into that.
Please.
I think I would agree to some extent that women have had different social roles that have been formed to it, and there is definitely, the neurological ability of women to keep the both sides of the hemisphere in connection versus perhaps the sequence aspect of how men process information. But going to Mariko's point of the economy and financial issues that have been prioritized, I mean, within economic theory, there is a lot of, there's the sort of the profit of the collective effort, and those who sort of take the rid-off effect from that. When it comes to grassroots initiatives, even small disbursements that go into households, it has been more beneficial to give money to women, because then we know that the money goes collectively to the household, for the children and the men equally, and the woman as well. Whilst usually if it gets given to men, it tends to go for more individual purchase and expenses. So I think everything that we really need is in place. It's just perhaps the way the tools have been used. So it would be important to distinguish what we classify as something as a concept that is perpetual versus something that is just being used as a tool for a particular purpose. And within society of how women operate, female leadership, I think, has changed quite a bit throughout the time. And just because in the social sphere, women had to face harder challenges of being leaders. So it was a lot more fighting warrior to be recognized, to have that space. And the more space comes in, the more freedom women have to just be women and not have to fight to be leaders in that aspect. The leadership style starts to soften up a bit and starts to shine from my perspective. And that's so beautiful, because it's not only about the collective, it's not only about bringing people together, but it's the way how we do that and reach that consensus approach. And also the communication and our ability to communicate and bring different elements to the table. So it's not only bilateral conversations, but we can have multiple communications at the same time and sort of bring that unison together. So I think there's a lot of advantages both to the female and the masculine. But as long as both are sort of balanced and work together, I think that is where we are at optimal space. But perhaps that openness of embracing it is something that women is sort of pushing forward, and that hopefully will be met as well from others. So we see some progress in that area, but it definitely is a long road to go still for it to be equal.
Yeah, may I sort of piggyback on, something Anna said, and I love the way Anna said, multitaskers by excellence, and,
Yeah.
women do have that multitasking ability, resilience, creativity, ingenuity. My mother, would say, she had this saying, learn to skin a flea to make a lizard a jacket. So can you imagine skinning a flea to make a lizard a jacket? And she was just talking about being frugal, being creative. And, in the context of war, I saw my mother, being creative in finding us still very nourishing and tasty food, using alternatives, during the war, in making our meals. And I think it was Churchill who said, don't let a crisis go to waste. So here we are, something that we at the Every Woman Treaty call the pandemic within the pandemic, where we have the pandemic of violence against women and girls rising exponentially. You and I know that the UN Secretary General said, let there be a ceasefire behind closed doors, because the home space that was seen as safe in the context of COVID, with the lockdown, with women, locked in with their abusers, there was that exponential rise. And I say to people, now WHO is saying, let's build back better. Let's, there's a new normal. And I say, look to women, because the new normal that everybody is talking about is the women's normal. Women have, used this multitasking ingenuity, and they hold in their hands this new normal with which we can, rise out of, the embers of, COVID. This morning, in a Nigerian program, one of my colleagues, Dr. Roberts, called it a twindemic, and talking about the economic impact. And women on a daily basis are looking for alternatives. There are countries like Nigeria where they said, look, we don't mind dying from COVID, but the lockdown has stopped our livelihood. So there was this war between lives and livelihoods, and people needed to get to the farms, they needed to get to their businesses, and that's the twindemic. But you go to the women and they will show you how they have looked after their families against all odds. And I would like to pose this to Mariko as the, the one who is the academic amongst us. Let's have a study to see how it is that in countries where the women are leaders, that they have coped better with this, viral war that we have. But for certain, I'll repeat that the women's normal is the new normal.
Very deep, and indeed that we must not forget that this is a very critical point of our life and in our history in terms of the humanity's survival. The crisis that really forges, but we really be able to create hopefully something tangible, at the same time sustainable. So I will really join you. We can talk, other time, but I think we have a venue that we can capture the momentum for really, rebuilding the fact to lead to the new policy. Eleanor, I think we should really aim for that.
Okay. Because this is an action-oriented group of women. So we will continue. Yeah. And I'm sorry, did you want to contribute?
No, I was just going to perhaps ask Mariko, because she mentioned before the psychological effects, you know, of she talked about Japan and going forward, and I think the psychological impact as well with COVID is a very interesting topic, because within that you have seen that perhaps questioning that dynamic between men and women, if we're looking at that, men also have had to put up with additional pressures, because some men have had to perhaps suppress some of their feminine side and their feminine of what that attributes. And that has come out quite a bit in the psychological impact that COVID has manifested. So I don't know, Marika, I didn't want to put you on the hot spot, but I thought it was a nice point that you mentioned.
Oh, thank you. It's actually very, you know, critical what you say, but you know, when you really systematically analyze the you know, pros and cons, and then I would just, you know, say something that is very critical for you to understand. It's that in Japan we used to have this lifelong employment. Okay, so once you work for one company, you are really guaranteed for the entire life, but it's no longer there. And then because of all this technological, you know, advancement, and then the job that is no longer you know, one slot, it's not a linear. You really have to be able to now move around. So, you know, later on, maybe we should talk about how the AI and new technology will change whole scope of work. So, but in Japan, it's just social, political, you know, the policy and the legal backup is completely different. If you, as a woman, a wife, if you work and if you earn like $30,000 annually, or a little bit less than that, you know, 25,000, something like, you are actually punished, meaning that you will be added more tax. So women tend to, you know, they decide to take a part-time job, okay? So not to be really, you know, having a professional career, rather, you know, you become more, you know, just after the, you know, breadwinner, the husband. But currently the younger generation, women, you know, the marriage age is really delayed. So they tend to, you know, work, you know, later years, so 30 to 35, and then they are the lowest wage, and then the gender gap, we call it, for payment, is much wider in Japan. It's just so focused on the male advancement of the entire society. So in Japan, we are still suffering. We are still not, you know, yet. When you look at any data, Japan is economically number 3. You know, we used to be number 2 after the US. It's just, China just beat it us. So, but when you look at the women's status in Japan, it's just about equal Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So 120 or 130. It's worse than Nigeria and other places. So think about that. Think really about the nation that is really advanced, and then having this. So when you see the whole gap, actually women become just so numbed their body that there is no space to move. You know, everybody, it's like that. Then where do you see the hope? The women are, you know, when the economy hit, they are the first one to be let go. So, you know, they are the casualty of, you know, whole system, and then we really have to change it. That's why you see the population and the demographic change. Women are not producing enough babies, so we are really shrinking. In the 5 years, we will have 1 in 4 people will be older than 65. So we are really shrinking, you know. That's the ultimate sacrifice the nation have to, you know, go through. Japan really needs to really think about what it means to really flourish the human being's capacity itself, and what it means to have a human rights. You know, the word human rights has lots of different notions, but I think it's very important that, you know, as an Asian nation, to really focus on Confucianist system, to value, you know, inner strengths, not only for the outer, but inner and then outer. We have to bring both to have really more an enlightened solution for women's life. I think that's why I decided, you know, I was in Boston last year. I was with Anna and her husband teaching together. So this year, please remember, this year is a very critical year. In the US, it is the 100 years of women's suffrage. So this is really earmarking a milestone of women have been able to vote, decide the course of direction of life. So Japan benefited from it. We only adapted after we lost the war, and then American came, and then, you know, women were able to vote. So we've been practicing it only 75 years. So we still have a lot to catch up in Japan, but that's why I decided to just, you know, come to Japan and then really work for women and minority. And this is my call, and I really need your help. Anna, Eleanor, and Karolina, and Nancy, we need to really come together. We have so much to learn. And then, I've been teaching the PhDs, but this year I'm teaching bachelor's degree, the college student. It's been really enlightenment. I just really hope that the younger generation really can capture that, what they need to see, the reality of our system. And then to really forge for something they are very proud of. That's why I'm there to really work every step away. That's kind of the work that I'm doing. Okay.
Well, how do you then, and this is a question, Anna, I'll start with you. How do we as women leaders take care of our own health and well-being? Given everything that's been said, what are those characteristics that are needed, and how do we do it?
I think it's truly inspiring to hear cases like Eleanor, and when she talks about her mother and what she went with her sister through the war, and how they had to escape and become refugees. How do we take care of ourselves and our well-being when we have sometimes so much luggage, baggage that we have to carry? And it's a mindset. We have to be in peace with ourselves first. And Eleanor going through, or other people that have gone through traumatic situations, you can hold on to that, and that will hurt your well-being and your well-being, or you have to let it go. And it's amazing to see how tragedy can bring good things out of people. War can bring longing for peace. There is a Hermetic axiom that says, so within, as within, so without, as above, so below. And so as within, what we feel and what we think within ourselves, so without is what we're going to influence or reflect upon the environment. And so when we make the best out of the situations that we've gone through, we can influence others and bring change. I think Gandhi, we were with Mariko in India a few years back, and we saw this mural where Gandhi was, and he said, be the change that you want to see in the world. And I think that that is so, so important, because we're all connected. Our well-being is not only ours, it's everybody's well-being. And so if we can reflect that with kindness, compassion, love, and reflect peace on everybody, we see women coming together. We see that when there's a common good, so many women working for trying to end violence against women, so many people that have gotten together for the Black Lives Matter, so many young adults that came together after the Parkland shootings. So we start seeing a shift, and thank goodness now we see, at least here in the United States, more women elected to the House of Representatives, more women elected to the Senate, our first woman vice president. And
Yes.
so there's going to be a huge shift, and women are going to be able to make a huge impact right now for the well-being of everybody, I think.
Yeah, can I just add? I think it's very good that more women. I think globally we recognize collective effort and then working together. But I will add one more thing. Very important to understand the political system, the meaning, the voting to the legal system. Women are very good at sharing and chatting and then feeling emotionally content. But there is another action needs to be reached to change the actual system. That really brings a little bit of professional skills. So that's why that the education to really professionalize this area of peace building is so critical. That's why I today I had so many teaching, and then by 9 I'm usually in the bed, but I say, Anna, Eleanor and Karolina and Nancy's there, I can't sleep. I must be today this webinar. So that's the commitment that I think we really need to professionalize this area. And then, look at Stacy, Abraham, how she fought last few years, as her background, when she won the honor prize in high school, and she was admitted to go to the dinner table or something that at the governor's house, and then the gatekeeper, the security guy, she was with the parents. They said, "You don't belong here." They let her go, and the parents. But she said, "No, I am I won this award, and then I am invited." And then since that day, she decided that I'm going to change the world. I'm going to change this perspective. So look at it. After that, she really worked. Her parents, the dad only went to 3rd grade education, and mom is only the elementary school education. Look at how well, and then she graduated on the top in a Yale Law School, and then kept working on it. I have some colleague that has been working very closely with her. It's incredible. The energy and then the vision, that she has to really change all of us. And then I used to live just close Elizabeth Warren. And Anna knows, Anna, my, as my neighbor was Elizabeth Warren. Oh, she's like the really very warm. She's gonna say, "Hello, come," and then have a coffee. But she is so in touch with really willing to help each other. But what I learned, and then what she also said to you, is that we really have to systematically work in the system to change. We can't just meet and then psychologically, "Oh, I'm relieved. I feel really better. I have energy." No, our goal is to change the political system so that the entire whole family and then the nation and then the system and the global world will be much healthier place for our younger generation to survive and thrive.
I think it's so important that
I
nowadays
agree
now
with
we have
that,
women
because
in the oops, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Eleanor.
Go ahead, Anna.
No, just complimenting to what Mariko said. That's why it's so important that now we have more women as leaders in the world, here in the United States, in the Senate, in the US, vice presidency. So we are going to be able to change laws and regulations and get to where we're supposed to have women with their rights, right?
Absolutely.
Protection.
Absolutely. I wanted to, sort of go back to the question about self-care. And, for me, my faith has been, the platform, the foundation on what on which I stand. And time has come for us to understand that you cannot really separate faith and state. I'll give a good example or an analogy. I think it was a couple of years ago. Some of you might remember, I think it was a BBC presenter, but there was a presenter trying to talk on something like Zoom. And a toddler walked in and his wife crawled on all fours to drag the toddler away. And the thinking at that time was, he's in an important meeting. How do you, let a toddler, interrupt that meeting? Now, how our universe has changed. Enter COVID. And I've been in some very high level official meetings where a mother has had her child on her lap as she is conducting a high level meeting. So for me, peace is about it's okay. If your faith is, what sustains you, that's fine. These sort of hard lines and hard and fast rules, you cannot mix faith and state. That might be somebody's sustenance. That might be the very essence from which they derive peace for themselves, and they're able to offer peace to others. So, for me, time has come for us to not be so, hard and fast about certain things. Yes, there should be order, no breaking of the law, but just, as Karolina said, that basic respect for humanity and, accommodating all. Men accommodating women, women accommodating men. One of my big role models is my namesake, Eleanor Roosevelt. I never got to meet her, but just hearing about the Universal Declaration and how she was a leader in her time. So when I hear that, women were not leaders, oh yes, they were. They had broken that glass ceiling, but some clever person started to change the narrative. And then, others became gullible and reinforced that narrative. So we have been soaring for generations. In every culture, there are women leaders. So let's go back to the original narrative that women are leaders from the informal to the formal space.
And I think perhaps connecting the question that you had, Nancy, about being, for me, in many ways, a practical issue. I mean, every single human being, I see it a bit of a battery. You have your minus, you have your plus. And when you're an actor for change, you constantly meet against the structures, the narratives, the habits, the traditions. And so it requires quite a bit of energy to engage with that and deal with that, and perhaps not lose yourself in the system or not let the fight change you, who you are as a person. So I think it's important to have a source that gives you that positivity that you need, whether that's faith-based or whether that is in connection with a women's group, or whether that is your spirituality or sports even, or nature, whatever it may be. It's important to have that positive outlet and to have that community around you that kind of can support you in your actions and support each other in that movement, as Mariko was mentioning. But I think it's also good to question, yes, we need to, and we do fight within the political system, which, by the way, congratulations for the results of the US elections. I think, well, personally, I was very happy to see the results. But coming to it, we are so used to fighting within the system to create change that perhaps we don't realize that even the contribution of fighting against change, we are enabling that very system. And we are actually contributors to that very system. So is there another system that could be alternative, that could be different, to change the narrative so completely that we envision a political system that does not look like the, pyramid state building where you really have one person at the bottom and you have the masses at the lower. And there's a lot of things to say for democracy. It's the best system that we have at the moment. But democracy in itself is flawed. And I think if we don't question and if we don't challenge that, if we don't think about a narrative that is really beyond the imagination that we have had so far, I think women can contribute a lot of it in that conversation. What is the narrative? If we see a lot of women and how we organize ourselves as more of a circle, as more kind of reintegrating rather this pinnacle one person at the top making all of the decisions. So can we imagine a different system altogether that doesn't actually fit into it, rather than trying to change the system from within? So I think those are important things to take into consideration, and take the human element, as Eleanor was saying, instead of having this perfect image of what is the perfect politician or the perfect woman or the perfect man or the perfect mother, to just kind of accept the complexities and all the multicolors that we come in and see the beauty within that and enact within it. And I think in many times there is this complete black and white scrutiny of how we treat each other, both whether it's in the field or whether it comes more to diplomatic negotiations or peace negotiations, of what we perceive and what we expect to come out, rather than sort of open completely the dialogue from the very, very onset and beginning and say, can it look in a different way? And if so, how?
Well said, Karolina. I have this image too of one of the gifts in my life is being part of a women's circle, and the fact that it is not a hierarchy, that within a circle everyone has equity and a voice and responsibility and can bring their authentic selves to the table. Imagine, women have been sitting in circles for millennia, going back forever. Eleanor, to your point about the things that have been going right, and how do we go back to that source? How do we pull on that source within? Just for the sake of time, I can't believe that we're almost to the top of the hour. So I'm going to bypass some of my other questions, but I'd love to sort of close today hearing from each of you around this thought. As a global leader and a peace builder, what is one thing that you believe all of us can do to better support a healthier, more inclusive, and more sustainable world?
For me, it's about, waking up each morning and saying, how can I make the other, focusing on the other? How can I make the other person's life better?
And I think for me, yeah, it's an everyday implementation. It's like, if you have a job that obviously you have more access to the big issues, yes, that is important to take that role. But as individuals, as people, as mothers and fathers and sisters and daughters and so on, is to live it out, not to actually be a principle that you agree on in a meeting. But when you go out on the streets, it's about looking at your fellow human being, whether it's a homeless person that you walk by, whether it's a woman you see that is struggling with 2 children and need to go out into the life park, whether you see a taxi driver being mean to somebody. Take those equality principles and those human principles and apply it right there and right then. And if you have the possibility to open the doors for the women that come behind you, whether you're a man or a woman, open those doors, please, because they really need it. And it's wonderful to be able to have that for them.
To think of ourselves as microcosmos, that we ourselves, each individual, will influence in the macrocosmos, the world, our society, our environment. And like Eleanor and Karolina said, let's try to create and show the platform that we're used to for millennials. Like Nancy said, that we sit in circles and we share responsibilities and we share decision making, and that's probably the new system that we should have. Not hierarchy, but everybody the same, equality of inclusion. So I think that if we pay it forward, like Karolina says, open doors for others, show kindness, love, and respect towards others, the energy will shift in the world.
For me, I like to add another layer of, so to say, that really focus or the value of creating the ecosystem of trust between human and our earth, meaning the nature. Whenever you study the COVID, in the medicine that, because I'm involved in some medical stuff, that it's so critical to understand the animal world, that how we have been pushing them, then how those, destroying all this experimentation has really led to really have all this chaotic situation, especially in the Southeast Asia and others. I think when you get up in the morning, when you see the sun, it's really incredible. The sun is giving so much energy to our life. And then that's the energy that God, or whatever the faith you have, you are giving amazing opportunities. And then the source of life that are given each day is adding to another possibilities of your life, and then to your neighbors and your family, to, whoever the community you belong to. So I think it's very important for all of us to, yes, think about the human beings as an ecosystem, but I think we can broaden that now, especially 21st century. We really have to really take good care of our ecosystem and nature. The nature is incredible, that when the typhoon comes, it's so scary when it comes, and when it's really, into the typhoon, it's very quiet. But once that it leaves, so much sunshine, abundance of energy, it's just coming to your life. That's it, that the woman is the one that really, observe and then be able to emanate to others. So I think that all this, flourishment over, the human capabilities, and then the resiliency is something that we should cherish, and then channel through that energy to really create a new world. And I'm really hoping that Nancy, you were incredible, and you brought us together, and I loved every moment of our time. It's just so pity we have, I know that it's time. I hope that we can come together and continue to talk and learn each other. Because, London, Oslo, and then in Boston, I go back and forth, but I can't go at this year, in Oregon.
Right.
Japan, everybody is welcome to come either Boston or Japan, but I hope that we stay in touch.
I would love that. You're absolutely right, Mariko. I'd love to do this again with this panel, because we've just begun to touch the tip of this subject. And I would like to say that I'm very proud that Global Women for Wellbeing provides a platform for us to have these conversations. And I welcome all of you back. I know that we'll have you again, individually and collectively. And thank you so much for contributing to the conversation today. I wish all of you the very best, and I look forward to seeing you again really soon.